I still remember the first time he showed me how to cast my line. His hands kept me steady as the cold mountain water rushed around my boots. Looking back on it, fishing with my grandfather in the eastern slopes, in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, were the best moments I had growing up. Patience, strength, trust. I learned a lot from spending time in those streams. The streams in the East Slopes are home to countless plants and animals, like Alberta's native trout. These special fish, the West Slope cutthroat, bull, and Athabasca rainbow trout, hold the memories of our past and the potential for our future in their fins. The waters they swim in keep everything alive, including the people living in the eastern slopes or downstream who rely on these streams for drinking water. When I go back to those lush places my grandfather used to take me, I see changes. The eastern slopes are well loved, but also heavily used. More activity over time has changed these lands and streams. Alberta's native trout are now gone from most streams, and the water that used to run cool, clean, clear, and connected is now overstressed, muddied, and disconnected. One day, I hope to bring my grandkids to these same places, to feel connected to these waters and these fish that my grandfather and I grew up with. We can still keep Alberta wild and bring back our trout. By keeping rivers and streams cold, clean, clear, and connected, we will get to enjoy Alberta's wilderness at its best for generations to come. Native trout are part of Alberta. Let's keep them here.
Hi, I'm Steve Shentfield. I'm the lands manager for the local area here, and I have the privilege of working in the eastern slopes west of Rocky Mountain House. And we're out here today at Rocky Creek. Rocky Creek, we did a restoration project of the stream, and one of the reasons why we did the restoration project of the stream is we had multiple crossings on here from OHVs and other traffic as well, and it was causing sedimentation to the stream, which has an impact on our fish populations.
So every year since we conducted the reclamation here on Rocky Creek, we've come back and looked at the reclaimed trail just to make sure that things are still stabilized and revegetating nicely. And what we found is that the trail has regrown in really well. Crossings are doing quite well, they're stabilizing, and sediment inputs into the stream are decreasing. Our initial monitoring of the fish population seems to show that it's responding well as well, so that's all very positive signs so far. So bull trout are Alberta's provincial fish. They're also listed as threatened under both the Federal Species at Risk Act and Alberta's Wildlife Act. To thrive, they really need cold, clean, clear, connected water. And they're important because they're a canary in the coal mine for Alberta's watersheds. They're a good indicator of a healthy watershed and a healthy landscape. And when they start experiencing declines and being in trouble, that's an indication that there's other problems on the landscape. So really, by caring for bull trout and providing good habitat for them, we're really ensuring that our watersheds are healthy and that our water sources are healthy.
So generally speaking, when we come to streams, we want to make sure we keep the wheels out of water by putting appropriate watercourse crossings in or reroutes. And in areas like this where we do have quite a few crossings, we do reclamation efforts to help direct folks on more of our high dry sites where we can enjoy what Albertans love doing, whether it's using off-highway vehicles, horses, you name it, because we understand recreation being a key part in people's daily lives.
So welcome everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. My name's Lesley Peterson. I am your host for the evening. So let's get started. All right, thanks for joining us. You're at the Native Trout Workshop. So if this is what you're looking for, you're in the right place. Again, good evening. And this is our second session in the Native Trout Workshop series. And again, my name is Lesley Peterson. I'm the Alberta biologist at Trout Unlimited Canada, and I'll be hosting tonight. So tonight, I am joining from Calgary, and in the spirit of respect and reciprocity and truth, just want to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Tsuut'ina and the Stoney Nakoda, and all 6 regions of the Métis Nation in Alberta. And again, and to all the people that make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. There's also many others joining tonight from other parts of Alberta, so we acknowledge that includes traditional territories in Treaty 7 and 8, and the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. So a few technical things before we get started. We have 4 presentations tonight, after which we will have time for the presenters to take some questions. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. You're also welcome to leave comments in the chat area, but do please be respectful.
Leslie, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yep.
but we're not seeing your slides because you need to share your slides. It didn't come up.
Oh, shoot. Okay, let me try this again. Thanks for jumping in, Noreen. Okay, hopefully now you see this.
Yeah, just go to full screen. It's showing.
There we go.
Yeah, perfect.
All right, thanks. Sorry about that. Okay, again, yeah, and just, sorry, getting back on track here to ensure we have enough time this evening. If you do have questions, please focus on the topics that are being presented, and we ask you to keep your questions related to the speaker's topics. So I'm sure after a couple of years here, but most people are fairly familiar with how to navigate Zoom. But just a reminder that you can change your view at the top of your screen where it says screen view. You can change it from full screen or not. And you can also, on the right-hand corner where my floating head might be displayed, you can adjust that to between gallery view and speaker view, depending on what you want to see. So again, tonight is the second session in a series of 4. The first 3 sessions are evening sessions, and the 4th is a more technical daytime session, and you're welcome to join all of those. If you do miss one, a recording will be available until the end of March. And I think that we can probably provide information on how to access those recordings. And yeah, we do hope that you'll join us for the others. So again, I'm from Trout Unlimited Canada, and we are a registered charity. We have chapters across the country and professional staff that work out of Calgary and Guelph. Our work includes conservation and restoration, and science and education. But of course, we don't only care about trout, even though that's in our name. We see healthy native trout populations as an indication of healthy aquatic ecosystem. And so if it's good for trout, it's good for people. We know that the clean, cold, connected, and complex habitats and waterways that are good for trout also provide safe and secure drinking water, flood mitigation and drought mitigation, and water for recreation, agriculture, industry, and many other values. So with fish being the indicator, when fish are struggling, it's often an indicator that something in the system is broken. And there are a lot of activities on the landscape, so it can be hard to figure out what specifically is influencing fish populations. And often it's several things. So tonight you're going to hear about how some folks are figuring that out and doing something about it. because fish aren't just a product of the water, they're a product of the entire watershed, which includes the land and us. We often hear about the importance of riparian areas. Riparian areas are kind of that buffer between the land and the water. These areas rely on plants to hold the soil and banks together, and they protect the land from erosive power of water, and they filter runoff. Healthy riparian areas are critical for providing clean, clear, cool, and connected waterways that native trout require, and that's best for all of us as well. And again, we do use land in different ways, and how we manage our activities on the land impacts the health of our watersheds and our native trout and their habitat. Trout Unlimited Canada is one of the members of the Native Trout Collaborative, which is a group of organizations working together to support native trout recovery in Alberta. And you'll hear a little bit more about that collaborative later. So this workshop, many of you might be familiar with it. Previous iteration of this was called the West Slope Cutthroat Trout Stakeholder Workshop that was held in person for several years. So this is the 11th year of this series, even though previously it was a West Slope workshop. So thanks to everyone that has supported this work along the way and been involved, whether you're new to this workshop series or you've been with it since the beginning. We do know that our actions, together do make a difference, and so it's an important way for us to get together and share ideas and knowledge. Great. So tonight we're going to be learning about native trout species of Alberta, and the theme is from analysis to action. So we hope that by the end of the evening, you'll have a greater appreciation for Alberta's native trout species and understand some of the ways that you can support their recovery. So this is who we've got lined up today. So we're looking forward to it, and without much further ado, I am going to introduce Elliot and Matt. So let's see. Matt or Elliot, I don't remember who is going first. If you don't mind sharing your screen, we'll get that started. So Elliot Fox is a member of the Kainai or Blood Tribe First Nation. He's worked in the field of natural resource conservation in southwestern Alberta for the past 27 years as a fish, wildlife, forestry, and rangeland and climate adaptation technician with Parks Canada and Waterton Lakes, also with Alberta Fish and Wildlife, the Earthwatch Institute, and the Resilience Institute as a land manager with the Kainai and Piikani First Nations. Elliot is a graduate of the Renewable Resource Management program at Lethbridge College. He's also a member of the Kainai Ecosystem Protection Association steering committee and the Kainai Bison Rematriation Advisory Team, who was instrumental in returning a cultural herd of plains bison to Kainai lands just a year ago after a 140-year absence. Recently, Elliot has been working as the assistant project manager for the Blackfoot Confederacy Native Trout Recovery Project. And Matt Coombs they're going to be co-presenting. Matt is a director and senior fisheries biologist with Fintegrate, Fisheries, and Watershed Consulting. He's got 20 years of work experience in fisheries and aquatic biology in Ontario, BC, Yukon, and Northwest Territories. He works on projects that conserve fish and fish habitat, seeking to understand broader watershed processes that fish and species at risk depend on, and prioritizing restoration efforts. His experience includes monitoring dispersal and reproductive behavior, snorkeling and telemetry surveys, leading fisheries management and recovery efforts, working with federal and provincial regulators to implement legislative protections, conducting fish and fish habitat assessment for industrial projects, and establishing community-based monitoring and restoration programs with Indigenous communities and NGOs. Matt has lived and worked in the Crow's Nest Pass since 2008 and enjoys spending as much time as he can on local streams and rivers. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Elliot and Matt.
Thank you, Lesley. Okay. Kitkanaktimatim pua ni takyax. Nastuan na go magoyo kini. So what I just said was hello, friends. Glad to see everybody. My name is Elliot Fox, but I just said my Blackfoot name. And it translates to wolf collar. Apparently it was given to me by a late elder, a late Blackfoot elder, and he knew I had a passion for wolves. Anyway, yeah, thank you, Lesley and Trout Unlimited and Cows and Fish for allowing us to present. I'm currently working with others as the assistant project manager for the Blackfoot Confederacy Native Trout Recovery Project. It's a 3-year project funded by the Aboriginal Fund for Species at Risk, or AFSAR, administered by DFO, focused on examining the health of a couple of native trout populations in the Bow and Old Man watersheds in southern Alberta, namely West Slope cutthroat and bull trout. As these native trout populations are in decline, our research has focused on the presence or absence of these two species in our study area, being the Bow and the Old Man watersheds. Thanks to Trout Unlimited Canada and Cows and Fish for allowing us an opportunity to share our work and findings. What Matt and I will be talking about today is how the Blackfoot Confederacy is supporting native trout recovery within Blackfoot territory. To give you an idea of where Blackfoot Confederacy Native Trout Recovery Project is, Blackfoot territory is a broad area that continues to be documented and is centered on the Great Plains of North America. The Continental Divide, Yellowstone River, and North Saskatchewan are some important landmarks within Blackfoot territory that you'll all be familiar with. The Blackfoot Confederacy is made up of one nation in Montana, the Blackfeet, or Amskapi-Piikani, and 3 nations in Alberta, Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai, or the Blood Tribe. If you look at the map, our study area is in the heart of Blackfoot territory, which is essentially in the heart of North America and includes the headwaters of the Bow and the Old Man watersheds. This area of the continent has been described as the water tower of the continent. So a large portion of people living in these 2 watersheds, including us who are in Alberta and others downstream, depend on this water every day. These nations each overlap the Bow and Old Man watersheds, which are the only 2 watersheds east of the Continental Divide, where bull trout and West Slope cutthroat trout are native. So these watersheds were selected as focal watersheds for this project. The watersheds are central to Blackfoot territory, even though the territory expands much further beyond them. And if you notice on the map, we're right in the heart of North America. And yeah, so it's a pretty important place. So we're working on conserving and restoring West Slope cutthroat trout and bull trout. And that's just one of the ways the Blackfoot people are exercising our role as guardians of the East Slopes. With Western science, we know that those native trout species are indicators of ecological integrity, and their continued presence or absence is an indicator of ecological health. The Blackfoot people have played a central role in caring for the East Slopes since time immemorial, long before Alberta existed. So the Blackfoot Confederacy Tribal Council has a broader project funded by the Canadian Mountain Network focused on our role as guardians of the East Slopes. Next slide, Matt. Blackfoot people have always maintained a close connection with the land. With rapid industrial development and agriculture expansion over the last 150 years, some of our people are concerned about the impact of their territorial lands and the loss of fish and wildlife species that are integral to our well-being. In the fall of 2019, the Blackfoot Confederacy Tribal Council established a project together with all 4 of our nations to work on recovering native trout. And there have now been 2 field seasons of activity beginning in 2019, 2020, and 2021. So we've just finished our second work of research, and we've got 1 more year. What I've learned in my Western science experience is that native trout are particularly sensitive to landscape degradation because their reproduction, survival, and growth is entirely dependent on aquatic habitat and the aquatic food chain. Native trout integrate many complex and spatial and temporal changes in the aquatic environment. And the aquatic environment in turn reflects broader watershed processes, including the effects of big changes like land use and water diversions. Native trout are affected by fishing and complex interactions within and between fish species, and they can also be sensitive indicators of the cumulative effects of land use. Native trout are disappearing from habitat they used to thrive in, and reliable, up-to-date information on the habitat they still occupy is important and lacking. The Blackfoot nations want to collect credible information that shows scientifically the changes that their traditional knowledge systems already indicate are occurring. The Blackfoot Confederacy Native Trout Project uses conventional field methods like stream temperature monitoring and red surveys and new environmental DNA technology to assess native trout habitat. The project has then helped to focus habitat restoration on priority areas. So I'm going to pass it on to Matt. He's our biologist, and we've been working with Matt and a few of our techs to just conduct this research and try to monitor and the status of these 2 important fish species, right? Because, well, they're disappearing, obviously.
Yeah. Thanks, Elliot.
Indicators of ecological health. So I'm going to pass it over to Matt.
Yeah, thanks for that great introduction, Elliot. So Southern Alberta is a semi-arid region, and fish habitat is already quite limited here. So when you put on top of that all the agriculture and industrial development, it's resulted in fragmented habitat and the introduction of many non-native species. So recovering native trout in Alberta has focused on conserving and restoring habitat, reconnecting that fragmented habitat, and preventing non-native fish from invading and removing those fish in certain situations. So to see where these recovery actions are needed and how effective they are requires monitoring over large areas. And that's what the Blackfoot Confederacy's Native Trout Project is doing. Red surveys are being used to assess spawning habitat. Temperature loggers are being used to assess the thermal suitability of habitat. And eDNA is being used to assess species presence. And nation staff and community members are working together to assess and restore habitat and to provide an opportunity to weave traditional knowledge with Western science. So the Blackfoot Confederacy has partnered with the Helbing Lab to develop and validate eDNA assays to do their eDNA analysis. They received a research grant from the Alberta Conservation Association to support this work. The lab focuses on targeted species-specific quantitative PCR assays. And these are a good fit for community-based monitoring because these assays are better understood than metabarcoding methods. And the lab spends a lot of time developing and rigorously evaluating the reliability and performance of its assays. So the cutthroat trout assay was developed originally using coastal cutthroat as well as Lahontan cutthroat and a few West Slope cutthroat trout samples from Alberta, but it's proven to work well here in Alberta to differentiate cutthroat trout from rainbow trout, but it doesn't distinguish between genetically pure and hybridized cutthroat trout. The Helbing Lab's first rainbow trout assay actually didn't work so well. It ended up saying that DNA from West Slope cutthroat trout tissue samples that we provided the lab was actually rainbow trout DNA. So a new rainbow trout assay needed to be developed, and it's now working well to distinguish rainbow trout and cutthroat trout using tissue samples from both Alberta and BC. The bull trout assay that the Blackfoot Confederacy is using is actually the same assay that the US Forest Service is using in their range-wide distribution assessment, and it's based on nuclear ribosomal DNA. So that's a bit unique because most eDNA assays are normally based on mitochondrial DNA. And it seems to be working well so far. The Helbing Lab has developed a new brook trout assay using tissue that the Blackfoot Confederacy collected using electrofishing. And there was another assay available, but it was developed a long time ago before there was much mitochondrial DNA sequence data available. So it may not have been very species specific. So this new assay has been developed and it's now being validated with eDNA samples that the Blackfoot Confederacy has collected. So the largest amount of time and cost in developing new eDNA assays is in the validation stage. And the Blackfoot Confederacy has really contributed a lot to doing this. Confirming that the assay works in new parts of a species range takes a lot of time, and they've done a lot of work collecting tissue samples and also collecting eDNA samples. So you collect tissue samples from both the target species and closely related species that could result in false positives, and then you go and collect eDNA samples from known occupied sites. So I'll just go over some examples of how the Blackfoot Confederacy is using eDNA. This is an example of Bagati's staff using eDNA to confirm cutthroat trout occupancy upstream of a culvert that may be acting as a partial barrier. And this is another example of a culvert that's fragmenting designated critical habitat for West Slope cutthroat trout in the Crow's Nest Pass on Rock Creek. The Blackfoot Confederacy plans to use eDNA to sample whether there are cutthroat trout upstream of this culvert, because the cutthroat downstream of the culvert are only occupying about 3.5 kilometers of stream that's isolated above a waterfall. So there's not very much habitat. So if this culvert could be replaced with a bridge, that would be really helpful in providing more habitat and increasing the chances that this population of pure cutthroat trout would persist. So bull trout habitat occupancy is also being assessed by the Blackfoot Confederacy in the St. Mary and Belly Rivers and Lee Creek, which all flow from Montana into Alberta. And these streams are designated critical habitat. So you'd expect that they do have the bull trout in them. But when the St. Mary River was sampled in 2020, only one of 24 technical replicates actually detected bull trout DNA in the St. Mary River, and no bull trout eDNA was detected in Lee Creek. So in the summer of 2021, as well as in the winter of 2022, sampling sites on the St. Mary River and Lee Creek were moved further upstream, closer to where the bull trout may be still persisting, to see if bull trout DNA would be detected. And then a new site was also added on the Belly River. That's a picture of Elliot there taking an eDNA sample on the Belly River just upstream of a weir, where if bull trout go over that weir, they're not going to be able to get back upstream. So assessing whether bull trout are at that site was another activity that was done. Being able to sample eDNA at any time of the year really provides a lot of flexibility for a community-based project like this. So Elliot and I were out on the St. Mary River and Lee Creek just a couple of weeks ago, and were able to collect eDNA samples there. In In 2020, the Blackfoot Confederacy also sampled Westfoot cutthroat trout eDNA on a creek in the Kananaskis watershed. So previously, this creek did have a population of Westfoot cutthroat trout, and the last cutthroat that has been documented in the creek was captured in 2015 by some anglers that are concerned about the population. But the eDNA sampling that was done by the Blackfoot Confederacy in 2020 didn't detect any cutthroat DNA. So it's believed that that population has now become extinct. And that's a real concern because the Blackfoot people are connected to the land in a real way in this location because the Kananaskis Lodge is right adjacent to this creek. And that's actually a lodge that's owned by Siksika Nation, and fishing would be an important tourism opportunity for guests at the lodge. In 2021, Blackfoot Confederacy also sampled the Sheep River above the Sheep Falls to assess whether Westfoot cutthroat trout occupy this large drainage above these falls. Historically, the area was barren, but cutthroat were stocked up above the falls until about 10 years ago. And so the habitat was designated critical habitat, and angling and electrofishing suggested that there was some natural recruitment occurring, but that spawning wasn't occurring every year due to cold water temperatures. So stocking was continuing about every 4 years, but then it stopped and no fish have been caught recently by electrofishing. So it's unknown whether there is actually a self-sustaining population of Westfoot cutthroat trout that persists above Sheep Falls. So the Blackfoot Confederacy assessed Westfoot cutthroat trout occurrence above the falls with eDNA, and that would be an initial step to inform recovery options, because with climate change and warming habitat, the habitat may become suitable for stocking in the future. So because the eDNA assays can distinguish between pure cutthroat and pure rainbows, Blackfoot Confederacy also started using eDNA to check if rainbow trout are invading and to assess hybridization risk. So sampling for rainbow trout has occurred on Lee Creek, Syncline Brook in the Castle, streams in the Ghost Wipers area, as well as Beaver, Trout, and Callum Creeks near the Porcupine Hills. Irrigation dams are fragmenting river habitat for fluvial bull trout in southern Alberta. So Piikani Nation is also using eDNA to look for evidence that bull trout in the Oldman River are using Pincher Creek as a spawning tributary. It's the only stream that fish that are lost over the Oldman River Dam from the Three River metapopulation that exists above the dam can still spawn in. So bull trout have been detected using eDNA in the headwaters of Pincher Creek, but not at the mouth of Pincher Creek yet. But sampling by the Piikani Nation and the Blackfoot Confederacy is happening on a regular basis throughout the spring, summer, fall, and winter to see if there are any bull trout that may be moving from the river up into Pincher Creek. And the Blackfoot Confederacy is also experimenting with using eDNA to monitor if bull trout are being entrained in irrigation canals, because Trout Unlimited has often captured adult bull trout during their fish rescues in the canals. So eDNA may be a tool to assess whether that's still occurring. So this is a map of 60 sites where eDNA has been sampled by the Blackfoot Confederacy in the Bow and the Oldman watersheds. You can see that there are a lot of green sites. That's where the target species is primarily bull trout. The pink sites, the target species is cutthroat. But the nice thing about with eDNA is that all the samples get tested for all 4 species. Unfortunately, we don't have results from the 2021 and 2022 field seasons to share with you yet. But this map does show the results from 2020. And just to give you a bit of an idea of how the eDNA tests are done, the first step is always to check that there is viable DNA in the sample, because there should always be at least DNA from algae in any water sample. Then the samples are tested for fish DNA, and then as a final step, the species-specific tests are performed for the 4 target species. So the Blackfoot Confederacy conducted bull trout red surveys throughout the Oldman and Livingston rivers, as well as in Hidden, Dutch, Racehorse, and Daisy Creek. And this map here shows where those surveys occurred. This graph is just showing the red counts from the Blackfoot Confederacy's surveys in 2020 compared to past data. And overall, the red counts showed a generally consistent pattern with previous data. Red surveys for West Slope cutthroat trout were expanded in 2021. On Beaver Creek in the Porcupine Hills, 13 reds were found downstream of an off-highway vehicle ford that the Blackfoot Confederacy did some riparian habitat restoration on. And in Honeymoon Creek, there was actually a cutthroat trout red survey conducted as part of the kickoff training at the end of June of this year. And even though it was extremely hot out, 35 degrees Celsius, and the water was still 15 degrees Celsius, 2 Kainai lands technicians found these cutthroat spawning. And I'll just show a quick video of these fish spawning. So the Blackfoot Confederacy also surveyed Star Creek in the Crow's Nest Pass for West Slope cutthroat trout spawning on a reach of the stream where there are some fords crossing designated critical habitat. So fish were observed, but no reds were found. And the Blackfoot Confederacy has discussed with the Old Man Watershed Council whether there could be a collaboration to address the erosion that's happening at these fords. They are part of a designated trail system that's approved by Alberta Environment Parks. Blackfoot Confederacy has also done red surveys on the Highwood River in 2021. And they only found 2 reds on the Highwood River, but they also did red surveys on Smith-Dorian Creek, where over 38 reds were found in a very short section. And that's because Smith-Dorian is probably one of Alberta's strongest bull trout populations. And that work was being done in collaboration with Trout Unlimited to help DFO identify when and where to collect bull trout eggs as part of a study that was looking at how temperature and climate change is impacting bull trout.
Matt, sorry, I'm just jumping in. You have about a minute or so left.
Okay, so this is just a quick map here showing where some red surveys were done on Pincher Creek. All the reds were found downstream of the Castle Park, which is shown here on the map. The reds are shown there in white. So they were mostly on private land. So that was kind of a unique find. And then red surveys were also done on Spinecop Creek. And that was done upstream of the boundary of the Castle Park. And yeah, these two creeks are quite unique in that Pincher Creek and Spinecop Creek are both isolated from other bull trout populations by dams. And just to talk briefly about habitat restoration, that's been a big component of this project as well. There's been training in habitat restoration through collaboration with the Ghost Watershed Alliance and Dave Polster. Culverts are also being assessed using the Alberta Watercourse Inventory app. And I'll pass it off to Elliot to quickly finish things off. If you can step in here now, Elliot, and talk about your interviews.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Yeah, so I think I got like a minute. But anyway, yeah, so I've been interviewing Blackfoot elders on the significance of fish and water in our territory. I've got a bit of a spiel, but I will skip over it and just summarize. But yeah, so obviously these fish are disappearing from these headwaters, right? And I've interviewed elders and they've informed me of the significance of fish, water, and places in our territory. And I just want to mention a couple of incidents. We went to Lee Creek in the upper headwaters of Lee Creek earlier this summer, well, last summer. And we went to do an eDNA sample, and this resident there was alarmed. He said, these people are developing this development on Lee Creek, way up in the headwaters, sorry. And it was it's obviously designated critical habitat. So there's heavy equipment moving through the stream, and it's documented. And I brought this up with TFO and AEP, and they didn't seem to care too much, and that's pretty alarming. So I'm just wondering, it's critical designated bull trout habitat. So how can all this development be happening? So that's one of my main concerns. But anyway, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, there's a legislation, but why aren't they enforcing it? So that's all I have, Matt. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we're kind of short on time, but there were a few other examples. This is some fords that Elliot observed on Dutch Creek, and we also observed some similar habitat disturbance on Pincher Creek. Sorry that the presentation was kind of rushed there, but yeah, overall, the goals of the project going forward are to continue to develop internal capacity within the Blackfoot Nations to lead this type of work, to continue gathering and documenting Blackfoot knowledge, and to work to weave that knowledge with Western science. And just to quickly wrap up, these are the partners for the project. So the project has government partners, the Alberta Conservation Association, a number of watershed stewardship groups, Trout Unlimited, and Cows and Fish. And yeah, thank everyone for your attention to this presentation.
And yeah, sorry, Matt, but what I would like to say before we close is, there's federal legislation that's supposed to protect these habitats, but why isn't it being enforced, right? And it's critical habitat. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out. Thank you.
I think there's actually a survey question that we're going to ask participants about.
Yeah,
all
great,
right, thank you.
great
Thank you,
segue.
Lesley and Amy and all you guys. Yeah, so it's frustrating, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And thank you both for your presentation. Lots of really great work being done by the Blackfoot Confederacy, and we're really proud to be part of that work as well. So folks, you have a poll that should have shown up on your screen. So just take a moment to read this and answer, just a yes, no, I don't know. And yes, we'll just give you a minute to answer that.
And maybe just a reminder, if people aren't familiar with polls, that you can scroll down because there are 2 questions. So if you haven't seen both questions, just move your cursor down the side of the poll and you'll find the second question.
Thanks for that, Noreen. And while folks are doing that, maybe we'll get Helen to turn your camera on and get your presentation ready. And then I'll just leave the poll up to folks in the background that are managing that. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Helen Irwin. Helen holds a Bachelor's Science in Environmental Management from Lancaster University in England, with a focus on water resources, science, and policy. Through her dissertation research, community forestry facilitation in Scotland, analysis of an agency partnership pilot project, and as community waste planning officer for municipal government in Scotland, Helen's career was founded in participatory approaches to environmental decision making. There's I think you might all see the answer to the poll up there now. So thanks everyone for participating in that. Kind of interesting. Sorry, Helen. So Helen is specialized in environmental impact assessment, working as environmental assessment scientist for over 10 years in the UK and Canadian private sectors, and in a regulatory capacity with Parks Canada since 2011. In this role, her focus has been on practical and effective approach of EIA requirements during project implementation. Helen has further diversified her applied science and operational resource management experience, including Parks Canada ecological integrity monitoring, human-wildlife conflict and aquatic resources management programs. Helen's background in science and policy, along with her diverse practical field experience, results in a project management approach that is inclusive, science-driven, and pragmatic. So thanks, Helen. Happy to have you with us tonight, and I'll let you go ahead and dive right in.
Thanks, Lesley. Yeah, so I am an ecologist and project manager with Parks Canada. And my main focus at the moment is habitat restoration and native trout species at risk recovery in regulated river systems, so dam regulated river systems in Banff National Park. Sorry, and I'm just having trouble moving my slides forward here. There we go. So there's 2 dam regulated river systems in Banff National Park. A lot of people don't realize that. One of them is the Spray Dam. So the dam itself is actually located outside of the park, but influences the flows that come into the park. And then there's the Cascade Dam as well, which sits within Banff National Park. And these dams pose the greatest impacts to freshwater connectivity within Banff National Park. And with the compounding effects of climate change and non-native invasive species, our native trout have been displaced from these systems. So while we have our eye on the future restoration of the Spray River system, we've made considerable progress on the Cascade system. And this is what I'm going to be speaking about today. So this system has been impacted not just by the dam, but other historic activities, such as stream crossing structures for roads and railways and trails, aggregate mining historically for construction of the Trans-Canada Highway in several places along the stream channel, diversion of the stream channel for mining and for road construction, and non-native invasive species introduction, both on land and in water. So we've had non-native invasive invasions, and as a result of those, the displacement of our native species. So while it's in a protected area, and so you wouldn't necessarily expect to encounter these layers of human impacts, its front country location and these historic impacts combine to provide a good case study for how we can address these types of impacts, which are common to many freshwater ecosystems. And one thing that we've learned in addition is sometimes it takes a catalyzing event to overcome some of the barriers to progress. So we'll get to that in due course. I'll just sort of bring us in, focus in on the system that we're talking about. So the dam, the Minnewanka Dam, that was constructed in 1941 under the War Measures Act during the Second World War, diverted the Cascade River. So you can see the upper Cascade River at the top there, dark blue, and lower Cascade River at the bottom. And this lighter blue section in the middle here, that 9 kilometers of channel was essentially diverted through the Tujac Canal system to that hydroelectric power plant that you see as you're driving from Canmore to Banff along the Trans-Canada Highway. So the flow reduction was over 99% of the flow. So there is a pipe through the dam that does feed some amount of water into the stream channel. And when the dam was first built, that was a flow that was only turned on during the summer months. At the time, it was considered necessarily only for aesthetic reasons within the park. So what happened to the ecosystem as a result? Well, obviously you would have a loss of downstream connectivity. There was not enough flow in the system to maintain flows in that former large river channel all the way down to the bottom. So it essentially dried up from about halfway down. And you can see the pictures on the right there. It just shows an historic photo of when there was a river flowing, and post-dam construction, there's no river to be seen there. So with that loss of connection downstream, there was fine sediment inputs into the system from tributaries that had nowhere to go. So it just accumulated over the decades and buried all of our native substrate. With that slower moving, warmer water that we have combined with the non-native invasive brook trout that had been introduced into the system, essentially those brook trout thrived in this degraded habitat and our native species were displaced. So as early as the 1990s, Parks Canada was already eyeing up how they could tackle restoration of this ecosystem. But there were numerous barriers, the sediment being one of them. We also had numerous stream crossing structures that had been built that were undersized to carry any additional flow, as well as the pipe infrastructure through the dam up until just a few years ago remained the original old wood stave piping from 1941. And so an incredibly leaky pipe and with a valve system at the upstream end. So it's a 600-foot long tunnel that you're looking down there. So a rock tunnel, and the valve system is at the upstream end. So if you can imagine trying to operate the pipe or the valve when you're essentially standing underneath Lake Minnewanka and your exit is down a flooded tunnel with a leaky pipe, the safety concerns were too high. So it was not possible to increase the amount of flows at that time. Now, the 2013 flood was a real game changer. It was an unprecedented event. It was the first time the emergency spillway function of the channel had to be used. And this was the first time TransAlta had to operate it. So an incredible amount of water was released down the old river channel. And this was devastating to infrastructure along the way. So many things had to be rebuilt afterwards. However, in Cascade Creek, it also washed away all of that fine sediment. And that sort of opened up an opportunity essentially for Parks Canada and TransAlta to work together on starting to make progress towards restoring this degraded ecosystem. So all of those pieces of infrastructure, road crossing structures, railway, trails, had to be rebuilt. And so they were rebuilt to a higher capacity to accommodate an increased amount of flow. And TransAlta decided to invest in their riparian penstock infrastructure. So they were safely able to increase the amount of flow into the stream. And concurrent to the construction of that new pipe system, which required a full shutdown for several years, that really shrank the amount of habitat to the smallest amount possible within the system. And during that time, Parks Canada was able to complete the removal of the non-native invasive brook trout population. So a lot of progress had been made by 2016, and it sort of paved the way for full restoration. The remaining issue really was this downstream lower half of the system that had been completely blown out in the flood. So if you look at that photo on the left of the image there, we have this really wide blown out channel with large cobble and still just a relatively speaking small amount of water. And so that water was not going to have enough energy to form itself a functional channel. So we knew we were going to have to go in and essentially incise a downscaled channel within the former riverbed. And so we hired a renowned stream restoration specialist, Dr. Robert Newbury, a hydraulic engineer, to help us with the design for this downscaled channel, with the idea of building a channel that is suitably sized to provide good habitat for our native fish species with the amount of flow that we can get from that riparian penstock, and then adding into that features that can provide suitable habitat, so riffles, pools, and boulder runs as well. So keep in mind when we started our design, this is sort of a bit of an analysis piece. This is what we were looking at, you know, that picture down on bottom right there. There's a lot of uncertainties around how much water this stream is going to be able to carry. Are we going to lose too much water down into the stream bed? Do we have any groundwater upwelling? So we basically proceeded with our design work for a small pilot section concurrently to monitoring how the system was behaving as the aquifer recharged with the increased flows that we were getting from the penstock. And that design process essentially involves surveying the channel, building a hydraulic model, so a digital model essentially that you can then run different flows through, make adjustments to the channel, and land on something that's going to provide habitat that's suitable in terms of depths and velocities, as well as substrate for your native fish species. And that allowed us to proceed with a 250-meter long stretch of construction. And now challenges, you know, we've got limited budgets. And so we were able to actually work with our highway operations group to have equipment and heavy equipment operators. We did all of our surveying in-house, and Dr. Newbury supervised the construction directly, so personally. And with the success from that, we were able to proceed with the design for all of the rest of the reaches. And I won't sort of tarry too long on each of these slides, but essentially each reach had different challenges that we had to address, different unique opportunities that were provided by what was there, including opportunities to reduce costs based on using features that are already in play. So Reach 5, which is sandwiched between CP Rail and the Trans-Canada Highway for 1 kilometer, we were able to add in riffles and pools and boulder runs. Whereas a former gravel pit area, we were able to convert more into a wetland environment. And it was a location that during the recharge, we realized was a loss location. So a location where we lose water into the groundwater aquifer. So we actually built a riffle at the downstream end of the ponds to hold more water in that area, to pump more water down into the aquifer to help maintain flows throughout lower discharge times of year and maintain those cold water temperatures in the stream. Another reach, we had to actually realign the channel, so to reintroduce an appropriate natural meander, as well as to capture groundwater flows that we were finding were upwelling into the stream from the sort of left-hand side of the image there. So yeah, our design process, was, surveying our elevations and then into construction, we stake out what we're planning on building on site and undertake that survey work while we're excavating and moving material to make sure we're meeting the elevations we're looking for. We had challenges with importing the materials we needed, like boulders, for example. So that 1 kilometer stretch sandwiched between the Trans-Canada Highway and CP Rail, we were actually able to get CP Rail to help us bring in boulders on a high rail, which was amazing. And some images here just of riffle construction. So some of the features that we were building, boulder placement, channel adjustments. And for this full construction that we did in 2019, we actually rented like a dedicated piece of equipment, an excavator, and hired a dedicated equipment operator, but we also had highways helping us with some of the additional equipment we needed, like a loader. And I should point out that you are seeing an excavator working in the stream here. And as Elliot pointed out earlier, that is a potential cause for concern. So I should just point out that there were numerous mitigation measures in place here, i.e. working with the fishless system, maintaining a disconnect in terms of surface flows between the construction work and the downstream area where there is fish habitat along the way, as well as turbidity monitoring within the system, et cetera. So that was accounted for, and we made sure we were communicating with the public about that as well. So here's some of the finished features: riffle, a pool, a boulder run. And we also constructed at the very downstream end a barrier to prevent upstream movement. Now that we, at the final stages, were able to reconnect the system to the downstream end, the lower Cascade River. So we needed to introduce a barrier to prevent upstream movement of non-native invasive species back into the system. And just a few images to sort of give an idea of progress. So, before in the 1990s versus after. A location where there is a non-existent stream to where there is a stream now with riffles and pools and boulder runs, and the start of some riparian vegetation as well. And again, that's that former operational gravel extraction pit area. So we made a lot of progress, but we're not all the way there yet. We have a lot of work yet to do. In the system, including riparian restoration work. This is work that we're doing largely with volunteer teams, including youth groups, corporate groups, and as well as our park stewards, our sort of regular volunteers in the park. And that work is being guided by some of our monitoring programs that we have in the system. So monitoring riparian health, we have some reference locations in upstream areas where we've had a wetted stream channel throughout the decades. And so we have an established riparian vegetation community, and that is our reference for our downstream locations where we've done our habitat restoration work. So that guides the species that we use and the methods that we use for our riparian restoration work. This is just some scoring from our riparian restoration work, which kind of shows, if you look at the percentages at the bottom, scores of 98 to 96%. So, close to perfect for our reference reaches, whereas our restoration reaches downstream were varying between 22 to 40%. Now, granted, the 40%, that is within a reach where that's that reach that we constructed in 2018, and we did riparian restoration work in 2018. So it's had several years to establish, and we can see it's already making a difference in terms of our riparian health scores. We're also continuing to validate non-native invasive species exclusion. So confirming that our barrier is working. That's a combination of electrofishing and night snorkeling surveys as well. And we're biomonitoring within the stream. So this looks at, water quality and stream health in terms of the bug community that's in the stream, which also matters in terms of ensuring that we have a sufficient food supply within the stream. So the graphic that's showing there is just showing we have a really high abundance at the top end of the stream that's been wetted through the decades, and that declines towards the downstream end. Not surprising, because we've had this gradual downstream increase in flows as the aquifer has recharged. So it's going to take a bit of time for that to even out and for the colonization to be completed. So we'll continue to track that as well. Water temperature is another important factor for ensuring that we have suitable habitat for our native fish species. So we do in fact have very cold water because the stream is fed from the bottom of the reservoir, and therefore that's providing a good shield for us for warming temperatures that we're anticipating to occur through climate change. And hydraulic habitat, these are a little bit sciencey, these slides, but essentially what we're showing is that we have managed to make improvements to appropriate depths and velocities in the stream through our construction work. As well as not only for adult trout, but also for spawning. So this graphic here is a little bit more useful in that it's a profile of the whole restored stream, and where you see those little red S's are locations where we've identified there's suitable hydraulic conditions for spawning. So typically it's at the tail in and tail outs of pools, not surprising. And we're also doing checks to ensure that there's suitable substrate at those locations. Another part of our work is the environmental flows analysis. And environmental flows is basically a term for ensuring that we have an appropriate diversity of flows through the year to mimic a natural system. At the moment, we don't. And so we're working on analysis to make sure that we can try to make some adjustments to the flow regime to mimic that as much as possible, because it is important for our native species to have a relatively natural flow regime. It's also important for ensuring that appropriate spawning habitat is maintained, so we don't get that fine sediment accumulation and we don't have so much flow that we're losing the gravels that we do have in this dammed system. We're also working on our potential donor population analysis for reintroducing. At this point, we're targeting West Slope cutthroat trout. So we have a number of different potential donor sites where we're doing genetics analyses to ensure genetic purity of West Slope cutthroat trout. And we will also need to conduct disease testing on those populations that come back for sure as pure. And I'm going to stop there and hopefully leave some time for questions later on.
Thanks, Helen. Wow, what a great project. And it's kind of interesting to see these things where the flood created an opportunity to do something that was maybe not possible otherwise.
Yeah.
So we will do some questions at the end, but before we move on, and now that everyone is here, I just want to do a quick poll to figure out who's here tonight. So if you can just answer one, what best describes your role here today. So if you're attending sort of representing or on behalf of an organization or on your own, just choose the thing that most represents you. And Axel, I'll get you to turn your camera on and get your presentation ready. So Axel Anderson is the Watercourse Crossing Program Coordinator in Alberta Environment Parks. Axel has almost 30 years experience in resource management in Western Canada and has conducted watershed research across Canada. So Axel's going to talk a little bit about the citizen science platform. So, and the results of the poll should have just shown up. So this is kind of cool. There's pretty strong representation from the angling community and the NGO community in particular, but lots of people falling into other. Yeah, and so you can hit close or X on that survey so it doesn't sit in front of your screen the rest of the time. And I'll pass the torch over to Axel to take it away from here.
Thanks, Lesley. I'm assuming my presentation came up okay there?
Yep, so, looks good.
So I was asked to talk about citizen science platforms as it relates to the program that, or the programs that we coordinate with within Alberta Environment Parks on the watercourse crossing portfolio. Excuse me. When I was first asked to do this, I kind of said, yeah, and then I was thinking about this on the weekend, and it's a relatively new job for me, and the way that we waded into this position is really focused on other aspects. So I was a little bit concerned about trying to do this presentation today, but I think I put together something that will work and hopefully meet the intent of the organizers that they invited me here, which is great. One thing to note, so they asked to talk about citizen science platforms. Oops, we're going too far here. And from a citizen science perspective, my career in this part of the world that we're talking about really does focus on science. And so when I heard the word citizen science, I'm like, okay, I get that. But really what we're talking about is how does the concept of citizen science or community-based monitoring fit within a government program? And I think that was what took me a little bit of pause on the weekend as I was trying to put this presentation together, is because not only am I relatively new to that component, it is something that really hasn't made a big focal point for our program yet. Although the tools are there and we've been promoting it, our focus really has been on other components. And it took me a while to kind of sit down and think of, well, how have we been using this, and how has the information that the citizens out there have been collecting have made it into the programs that we have. So before I do that, I've been talking about this a little bit. So I'm new to the roadway crossing program in Alberta Environment and Parks. I was brought on last spring to help develop and coordinate a new program for municipalities and transportation. And just a few days ago, it was announced in the budget that we have some more funding associated with that in the budget for 3 years out. So hopefully that program will be sustained. It's currently sitting, future expenditures expected to be about $21 million split between the two. So we developed that. Like I say, that was a big focal point, a call for municipalities to be able to apply for funding to do this type of work. But part of the program is these apps, or the app, and there's other tools out there for concerned citizens and groups and those that want to do good to be able to collect the information that would be used related to trails, roadway crossings, other types of things that are out there. And when I was thinking about this, who are we collecting data for? What kind of data quality do we need? What are the objectives for the data? How do we interact with the people that are collecting it? I'm just going to slip to another slide here and showing really what we're putting together as far as information. So this happens to be, I just zoomed into an area earlier this morning and pulled down a couple of screenshots of the tool that we're using. It has all the crossings that are predicted to be out there, whether or not an inspection has been done, and if it has some sort of disposition associated with it on public land, we pull that over as well. And my comment before, our focus really has been on those owned crossings. We're dealing with connected, the connected part of the system that we're talking about here. My red and blue lines, the blue lines are streams that are connected. The red lines are ones that are not connected. And I've said this joke a few times, but this is probably the one and only time in the government that I've had the most clarity in what my job is supposed to be. And that is to help turn the red lines into blue lines and make as many blue lines in these watersheds as possible. And so over the last 18 months or so, we really developed this program focused in on industrial crossings, Just down the road, same screenshot, just zoomed in the corner, municipal crossings. So using that app that I showed before that you could download using your phone if you showed the little QR code to your phone, or put it on your tablet and take it in the field. We've really been working with industrial proponents, municipalities, transportation to do that. We've been working to try and integrate that, so that same map that you saw, you can take in the field, and we can help direct people to where we know things are. Have all that stuff at your hand, like you'd expect with current technologies, the way they are, to be able to enable all of those folks. And you know, in large, citizen collected data is a big part of it. So one of the things I did when I started was I downloaded the app. I happened to be going on vacation. This is actually in British Columbia, back to my hometown and my home property. And this is a culvert that blocks the stream that cuts through the middle of the property that I grew up on. There was fish in the stream when I was little. There's no fish there now for obvious reasons. Used the app, collected some data. It worked. I get lots of comments from folks saying there's some spots that are outside of Alberta. Why is that? Well, this is one of them. So I use the app. I tend to think I like fish. I care about conservation. You know, I'm a like-minded person that wants to do something. So if I was a citizen science and I'm using my app, really what would I want to do with this? I think the intent really is to enable action. So, you know, the picture I showed before are the two pictures, one of the salmon and one of the bull trout. This is a BC system. You know, I worked with colleagues trying to understand what is there. This crossing that we're playing with here is not on their priority list to remediate, because you know, the focal species there are native trout from a recovery perspective, but it really is you know, the larger bodied salmon species that are there. Just to the picture on the right here, I don't know if you noticed it or if you can see my cursor there, but there is a bull trout here, and this is actually in a plunge pool of one of the crossings that we're hoping to fix, or at least fund the municipality that's responsible for this to fix. So, you know, it really is intended to try and improve the connectivity, and then down the road as we roll out the program to look more at erosion potential and sedimentations and deal more with the broader aspects of crossings out there. So what I really wanted to focus on here quickly, and I'll try and keep it short to conserve time for questions, is 3 stories that I sort of stumbled across about citizen roadway data. So, you know, this isn't really a targeted citizen science program, but this, since I've started these, I've run across and seen how data that were collected had enabled some sort of action. It may not be, you know, as dramatic and happy as we may like, but it is action much more than I anticipated moving into this process. And when I was thinking about it on the weekend, I've redacted these 2 email addresses. I suspect the people that took these photos are probably here. I've left the numbers, so I know who they both are based on the rest of their email address, but one of them is obviously from Southern Alberta. And I suspect the other one might be a hunter, or at least maybe own some rifles or something like that. But, you know, I again, sort of an outdoorsy person from the southern part of the province. So the first one I wanted to talk about, so there's the screenshot here on the left is the crossing in the Hinton corridor, and the very scary looking spider's web with red lines and blue lines on the other side with all the dots. Those are all the crossings. This happens to be Hardesty Creek, where the groups here that are hosting this and others have done a lot of really good work in the past. And there was interest from a local industrial operator of sort of helping out and doing something good in the community, of repairing some of these sites that were repaired before and have subsequently failed, and identifying a few others. I don't think this project will go through, but it was really nice to see. Happened to zoom in and click around, and from the app there was very good information that was collected on a series of crossings in Hardesty Creek in the middle here that let us know, you know, sort of what was the overall connectivity of that watershed. And without having that citizen science information, that would require someone from our office or ask someone to go out and collect that information to be able to round out what we might know about that watershed. We were able to pass that on to the proponent, understanding what they were interested in, and be able to put together a nice watershed picture for that. We've seen this one, actually. I was quite pleasantly surprised to, I expected Elliot and Matt might talk about this. It looks like I forgot to redact this here, but you can see it's Michael Wagner, who's actually a government employee using his, probably out on his own, happened to take some information from this. This is not an industrial municipality or transportation one. This happens to belong to a biocamp in the local area. It turns out the proponents here, or the people putting this on, are 10 steps ahead of us and have already identified this and have it in the queue to try and help this group repair this, have collected the proper information above and below the stream to make sure they're not going to cause any integration problems by letting non-native cutthroat upstream. They've done all their homework. But what I wanted to talk about is this actually popped up when we were having our meetings with our industrial proponents. I noticed this a couple of times. Not only has Mike Wagner been out there, but others have been out there taking photos of this. And when I brought it up to the industrial proponents, the interesting thing that they came back and said, well, if you know these things are out there, let us know. And these are large operators, in Alberta, and they are looking for good things to do. And so I thought that was quite an interesting opportunity to enable action to be able to collect this type of information and get it in front of potential industrial proponents that are looking to do good things on the land base as well, right? It turns out, we're not the only ones. The Trout Unlimited and others that have been putting a lot of effort towards replacing this already. So not something that we'll probably pursue any further, but it is a nice example of how these things that have come about and are here on the landscape, there might be a nice opportunity to have these things repaired just because we know about them. If we don't know about them, they become the bad news story that everybody knows is out there, and it's not getting fixed, right? The other one I wanted to touch bases on is actually a citizen science person who, I don't know if they were at work or where they were at, but went down an industrial road. And I haven't looked at the list here, but I would suspect that the industrial proponent and possibly the person that took these photos were there as well. This is a crossing on an industrial road. We have an inspection from the industrial operator. We also have an inspection from our own lands officers from 5 or 6 years ago, indicating that there might have been a challenge with it. This was just last summer. Nice photo, nice description saying it's a good culvert with no hang. It's a good size culvert. It's appropriate. It's a nice looking stream and it likely has fish in it. We had a good conversation with the industrial proponent that this got handed over to, because they were quite concerned why they might have a red line on my map and not a blue line. And so we were able to take a look at this and give that information back to the proponent. So, this really isn't a reporting line when you see something bad. Even when you download the app and open it up, it says if you see something that's a contravention, there's a different way to deal with it. There's a phone number that you need to call. But it really is a nice opportunity to be able to get information in the hands of the people that are having these conversations with the owners, having these conversations with wider groups, trying to understand how we might fund some of these projects, across the range of the province here that we're talking about. And one of the things I wanted to close on is I went from being quite concerned and almost a little bit cynical about the presentation and the role of citizen science that has played within the program on the weekend, to even this morning when I was putting this together. This was all by happenstance, pretty much. I don't think any of this was targeted or anything this was directed, other than there's a concerned citizens out there that are using this information and relaying it back, and it's making it into our system. And if I can find 3 examples that we've just run across in our regular basis, and there's more, I just tried to choose one from each bin. I'm actually, I should probably take a piece of humble pie and admit, that citizen science is probably playing a larger role in the program than I expect. And if we were to target it and harness this a little bit more, I think it would potentially play a huge role, especially as we get more engaged with the trail system in other parts of the province, in particular the northern parts of the province. So I just wanted to close, promoting, of course, the app that we have in the citizen science approach there. However, there are lots of other programs out there, right? And as a scientist, lots of good programs being run by academics and other scientists that are out there too.
Thanks, Axel. Yeah, definitely some familiar culverts in your presentation there that I've seen once or twice. And yeah, what a great way to collect a lot of information and sort of crowdsource that data collection and empower those that are doing the restoration to do as much as we can. So I'm the next presenter. I am going to talk briefly about our native trout communications collaborative and a project that we've been working on. So bear with me here. Okay, hopefully you can see this. So as I mentioned earlier, Trout Unlimited Canada is part of the Native Trout Collaborative, and within that we have a communications group. The partners within the collaborative are listed here on the screen, and various groups from Alberta and funding support from Fisheries and Oceans Canada. So our effort is really on recovering these species at risk. These are all threatened species, federally listed.
Sorry, Lesley, are you trying to show your screen? There's no.
Oh, is it not
screen.
sharing? Darn. No. Thanks for catching that. Okay, let me try this again. Okay.
That looks great. Yeah, you're good.
Thanks. Okay, so yeah, we've got these 3 species in Alberta. These are all listed under the Federal Species at Risk Act: Athabasca rainbow trout, West Slope cutthroat, and bull trout. And so our effort is to recover these species, but to do that, we also need to kind of raise their profile and elevate the awareness of these species, as well as others that share their habitat, like Arctic grayling, and that are also of concern. So I'm not going to get too much into all of the activities that the collaborative has been working on. Last week during the workshop, Becky Best-Birtwistle did a presentation doing that. So I would encourage you to check out the recording of that to get a sense of some of the cool stuff that has been learned and accomplished over the last 2 years. Tonight, I'm going to focus on one of the projects we've been working on, and that's the stream signage. So buckle up. This is going to be a little bit interactive because we want to hear from you. So if you've driven around BC, I'm sure, Axel, you've been driving around BC, checking out stream crossings. You've probably seen some version of these signs that you see on your screen right now. These are really basic, including the stream name, the fact that it's habitat for fish, and maybe some kind of statement suggesting that it's sensitive or important and there's a need to protect or steward it. And sometimes these signs have information pointing out who a local stakeholders might be in that area. So we wanted our signs to be similar to that, instantly recognizable to anyone traveling along the eastern slopes. Last year at this workshop, we shared some concepts with participants, and asked for feedback on messaging. And after that, we designed 2 different types of signs. One is has the native trout country and a trout silhouette, and one more designed for Arctic grayling habitat. We set a goal of choosing 50 locations for this past year, maybe a bit lofty, but well, we'll see. So the first poll that we're going to ask you, just to warm up here, have you seen any of these signs, either the native trout country or the Yorn grayling country signs while out and about. This is just yes, no, not sure. All right. Okay, well, I suspect that probably a lot of people have not actually seen them. We can share the results once we've given people, oh, some people have, that's great. Yeah, we have about 77% no, 18 yes. So we have actually only installed about 20 signs so far, but we've printed 60 and we have about 40 right now that are pending installation. So waiting on either permits or waiting for the ground to thaw. They've been delivered to the partners and we're just waiting for conditions to get them up. So I think we will actually surpass our goal of 50 locations. So I have another poll. This one might have to think about a little bit, but don't think too hard. This is mainly going to be a hypothetical question, I guess, because a lot of you probably haven't actually seen these on the landscape. But if you have encountered one of these signs, your native trout country, on the landscape, how would it make you feel? And you can choose as many of these options as you want, and just kind of take your gut reaction here. Don't have to put too much thought into it. There's no wrong answer. We'll give a minute or so or a few seconds to get folks to answer that. And yeah, if we're ready to share, I'll leave that up to. Okay, so yeah, a variety of feelings. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. If you have something that you want to expand upon your feelings, feel free to add that into the chat, either with the panelists or with everyone. It's up to you. So you can see in the map, we have kind of a pretty broad distribution from north to south of where these signs, this first batch of signs are intended to go or have gone. But obviously there's a few gaps. So, we're hoping to fill some of those gaps over the coming years. So we've got some up here in Peace Country. These are all grayling signs, and big thanks to the Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance and County of Grand Prairie and Northern Sunrise County for jumping on board right away to get those up. And we've got more in the Clearwater and Red Deer River basins in the works, and some in the Pincher Creek and Castle drainages down here, and Old Man. So if you zoom in to what that kind of looks like in terms of a location, here's an example of the Cutoff Creek sign. For example, you can see a little dot where that sign would go. This is how we're keeping track of where the signs are in our GIS and in a spreadsheet, so we can keep track of where all the signs are. So the next poll that we'll launch, again, there's no wrong answer here, and you can choose as many options as you like. If you see the sign, or hypothetically saw a sign like this on the landscape, how would it influence how you interact with the land and water in the area? So the answers here are a little longer, so I'll give you some time to think about this, so I can read them out too. Would it spend more time, spend less time, try and catch a fish now, avoid or reduce my fishing here, make me want to learn more, avoid activities in stream or close to the water, change how I perceive other activities in the area, make me more likely to speak about native trout needs to others, or maybe it will not influence your use of the area, or if there's something else that it might influence. So again, you can choose as many as you want, and there are no wrong answers. It's just a poll.
Yeah, well, sorry, Lesley.
Yeah.
What I would ask is, how receptive is the governments that enact this legislation? how receptive are they to, all these recommendations for the regulations, or how receptive are they?
How about, yeah, if you don't mind, Elliot, holding that question till the end, I'll just kind of get through this and then maybe we can put that question to the rest of the panelists. So just hold that thought. All right,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah, for sure.
Sorry. Thanks everyone for answering that. And again, if you have other thoughts or ideas, you can put that in the chat. And generally here, what we're trying to accomplish is, there's a lot of streams that we all drive by every day. There's no information on what they are, what lives there, why it matters, and who's involved in the stewardship of those waters. So without that information, it's harder for people to make fully informed decisions about their activities. And so that's kind of what we're hoping to accomplish here, and still a bit of a sense of pride and respect in what otherwise might have appeared an unnamed or sometimes even irrelevant stream. So we hope that these help to increase awareness and spark some conversations. And the last poll here that we'll do quickly is, are you interested in getting a sign in your area? Again, this is a quick one. Yes, maybe no. And while you're answering that, I'll just highlight some of the partners that we have had. ACA and through the Native Trout Collaborative, providing funding and design support. And these municipalities have really stepped up to partner with us on installation of these signs. And as far as what you can do, if you did answer yes, and it looks like a number of people did answer yes to that question, what I would suggest is contact your municipality if you'd like to see signs like this in your area, or reach out to local industry or other road owners, or maybe you yourself work for an industrial operator that has a road disposition and you want to see some of these signs. Get in touch with us, or have people get in touch with us, and we can help facilitate that. We're creating kind of a guidance document to help folks get these signs out, because ultimately this is meant to be community driven. We don't have the capacity to do this on our own, and we're hoping to just launch this and put it out to the world for others to do.
Well, what I'll say right now, and this is Elliot, eh?
Yep.
Yeah, you better include the Blackfoot Confederacy, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so include that on your list.
Will do.
Good.
And actually, Elliot, maybe we could talk about Blackfoot names too. I think that would be really interesting.
Well, that would be really cool. And I'm sorry, Lesley.
That's okay. I'm going to invite the rest of the
being
panelists.
A little bit abrasive, eh?
Sorry?
I'm sorry about being maybe a little bit abrasive.
Oh no, it's okay.
Yeah, we're part of this whole landscape, right?
Absolutely.
So it's my duty to include everybody, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know Lesley, and she is awesome. She is great.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Elliot. So I'm going to ask everyone to put the other panelists, please put your video on. And we have an opportunity to do a Q&A here with the panelists. I know there's a number of questions in the chat and or in the Q&A box. So we could start with that. And I don't know if maybe someone can let me know if it's possible for people to put their hand up and ask questions too. I think it's all in the chat, but why don't we start with this one? This question is for Helen. How long is the Cascade Dam to be operational?
That's a good question. And I'm afraid I don't have an answer. No crystal ball on that. There is a license in place for the dam with Parks Canada, it's a long-term license. And I think with the dam being a sort of integral component of flood management in Southern Alberta and recent assessments since 2013, and the scale and size of the dam, so a removal would be a huge undertaking, and certainly the sort of consideration for a dam removal is outside of the scope of little me, who is well below that sort of level of decision making. So I was hired to restore the ecosystem on the assumption that the dam is in place. So it's probably a question better sent to higher levels of government than myself.
Fair enough. Thanks, John, for asking that question. Next one is also for you, Helen. Are lake trout making their way down into Cascade Creek? Are you going to reestablish cutthroat trout and or bull trout in Cascade Creek?
Yeah, those are great questions. To the first question, yes, we are getting some lake trout. And interestingly, we have a whole community of different fish species in Lake Minnewanka, including non-native invasive fish species. So the ability for fish to come down the pipe that feeds the stream is something that we have been looking at and monitoring. And so in our fish exclusion monitoring program, what we have found is that we must occasionally be getting lake trout coming down the pipe, but only lake trout so far. It's probably to do with the depth of the intake and the sort of different levels within the water column that different species operate at. So it seems to be an intermittent thing, but it's something that we're building our knowledge on in terms of looking at the species that we're planning to introduce. So coming to your second question, we're targeting first West Slope cutthroat trout. We are also looking at bull trout. When you're doing a native fish translocation into an ecosystem like this, the bull trout are quite voracious. So our plan is you really need to target one species at a time. And so we would need to, if we want West Slope cutthroat trout in the system, establish that population first before we add in bull trout. So the plan is to potentially add in both, but also it will come down to our habitat suitability analysis and all those different parameters that we're looking at. So if we were to determine in the end that actually the habitat is much more suitable for bull trout than cutthroat, then we might swap what we're targeting to begin with. But at the moment, it's looking good for cutthroat, and that has been our target species up to this point in terms of design. So we're targeting them first, bull trout second. And going back to the lake trout consideration. So bull trout and lake trout do have the potential for introgression. So we've been looking at that question as well in terms of the suitability for bull trout. In lake environments, typically they tend to operate in different zones, and there doesn't seem to be a large problem with introgression. But in a stream environment that's more isolated, we're not sure at this point whether that could become more of an issue. So that's also a question that we're looking at. Nothing.
Sorry, I missed earlier information. Where are you from?
Where am I from? Originally? Originally.
Well, just who do you work for?
Oh, I'm from Parks Canada. Sorry, I was at the start of my presentation. I'm an ecologist and project manager with Parks Canada.
Okay, cool. Well, just wanted to know.
No problem.
Thanks, Helen. All right, so we have a question for Axel regarding the app and the inspections. And I know you didn't really touch too much on this, but the app is available for besides roads, also trails and those kind of crossings. And the question is, how could we encourage OHV users or ATV users to gather data using the app without feeling that their trails are necessarily going to be closed as a result of the inspection?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're challenged with the same with industrial operators as well, right? So, they're obligated to collect information on their own crossings, but do they want to divulge everything to the government? right? So these are common questions. I think a lot of it comes down to relationship building, and also groups like this to be able to link into the more responsible users to understand the benefit of having good crossings, having good repeat inspections and information associated with them, so that both things can coexist on the landscape. I'm hopeful that there'll be more attitude change towards this over time, especially with groups like this promoting this. I think that really is at the key of it, right? It's outside of trying to force someone to do this. People really want to see the benefit in doing it, and have to make that change inherently as part of how they do business in this landscape.
Thanks. Yeah, I would add too that having the data helps inform the decisions, whether it means fixing it, repairing it, or whatever that might be. But yeah, it's not always a closure. So we do have a question for, I guess, multiple panelists here. Kind of going back to the circumstances that Elliot Fox brought up, in the circumstances pointed out by Elliot when he saw heavy equipment active in critical habitat, what can a citizen do? So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that. I could take a stab at it, but I'll see if anyone else wants to.
I think that raising awareness of the issue is important, and obviously reporting it to the relevant authorities, even if action isn't taken like you would like it to be. The more that is done, I guess the attention of of regulators will go to where they get the most complaints. It's unfortunate that it is kind of a reactive system that way, but if more people are raising concern about an issue, that will focus attention on that issue. So I wouldn't suggest that it's a waste of time to bring those issues to both the federal and provincial governments, and both the federal and provincial governments would have a dedicated system, whether it's an email address or a 1-800 number that you can call and report that to. And I just think that these issues tend to not be addressed because their regulators are dealing with a lot of issues, and it doesn't rise to the top of the list because it doesn't usually receive a lot of attention. So the more attention that it does receive, the more likely it will be addressed.
Yeah, I think that's the same for, with poaching and with issues on the landscape. And I saw Evan just posted in the chat, there's a provincial hotline number that you can call. It's available 24/7, a 1-800 number. So you can report anything that you see on the landscape that you think is like an environmental, emergency or issue, and that will be investigated. So as far as like Elliot, you were asking about government willingness to take that on, I think too, it's they need to know about it first, because there's so many things out there. And unfortunately, the onus, I think, does fall on all of us to be the eyes and ears on the landscape, and sort of phone or email in those issues when we see them.
Well, the last thing, thank you, Lesley. The last thing I will say is, there's this current government legislation, right, about critical bull trout habitat in this case. And, we witnessed when we were doing our research and our sampling that there was clear violations of the critical habitats. And, I reported that to DFO and to AEP, and I got bounced around, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, you know, I know this is critical habitat. There's clear violations, right? Excuse me if I'm getting kind of upset, but I am. Yeah, there's clear violations of the act. So I'm sorry, Lesley.
I understand. I understand your frustration, Elliot, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts here.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm done.
So we have a couple questions about the signage. Somebody asked if there's a risk that signage may lead to increased pressure in stream systems that might otherwise have less angling pressure. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think it could. I mean, it might actually help people if they're looking for a specific stream to fish, that they intended to fish a particular creek, to navigate to that creek. Whether or not it would lead to increased pressure, I'm curious what other folks think about that. So there's another question here for Axel. Are there any areas where there are significant data gaps in crossing assessment which citizen scientists could help assess? And so identifying those specific gaps and where those inspections need to be done?
I would say yes. With the caveat being, I guess for the last year, our focus really has been on connectivity. So, you know, our identifying crossings that are likely culverts that likely have problems that we've seen lots of today. I think next field season, potentially, we'll have more focus on erosion and sedimentation, and that tends to be more of an issue where citizen science, I think, can help more targeted. Most of the culverts tend to be on an own disposition, so some entity is responsible for them. Industrial operator, municipality, or transportation, or similar. Whereas the legacy things, the trails that were alluded to before, as far as potentially being closed, those things, erosion and water quality issues, tend to be the primary focus of inspections there. So I think we'll have a better understanding of how to guide that next summer. This summer, we're still very much focused on fish passage. So there are some, but because they're owned by proponents, our emphasis is on getting the owners out to do this work, not on getting citizens to tell on them. But there's no harm. It doesn't take very long to take some pictures and send them in, and then we have it documented, right? That's at least to Elliot's point, at least it's coming in and it's documented. It may not be a targeted approach where we can use the help, but it's not, it doesn't go on deaf ears, put it that way.
Thanks, Axel. Okay, I have another one here for you. If culverts or artificial barriers are located on private lands, do landowners need to complete a full environmental assessment and receive permission permit prior to changing out culverts, as some barriers now act as protection to populations of pure trout genetics?
Yeah, I'm probably not the right person to ask this. That's not my department, but as far as I know, yes, right? So the Water Act, the Public Lands Act, and any of the federal fisheries acts and the SARA would still apply. The bed and shore belongs to the public land.
Matt, I wonder if you wanted to add any of that, because I know you've done some work on culvert inspections and working with folks on.
Sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, that's okay. If culverts or barriers are located on private land, do landowners need to do a complete full environmental assessment and receive permission and permits prior to changing out a culvert? Because some barriers now act as protection to populations of pure genetics.
Yeah, I would agree with Axel that because the bed and shores are still managed by the province, that would still be required. and that the onus would still be on them to ensure that they're following all appropriate legislation, including protecting the genetic integrity of any populations that could be affected.
All right, thanks. Yeah, definitely not okay to just go out and get your excavator and rip out a culvert on your own. All right, for this question's for anyone. What height of a culvert drop is considered a barrier to fish passage, or what velocities would be considered a barrier? Anyone interested in tackling that one?
I can take a run at that, at least in terms of the criteria that we use in the park for assessing culverts. So typically, and there's a lot of things to consider, but in simplistic terms, the way the criteria we have works is if it's a hang height greater than 0.6 meters in height, it's considered to be a full barrier, or a velocity greater than 0.7 cubic meters per second. But there's factors like if you have a hang height, but you have a pool, depending on the size of the stream and therefore the size of the fish in the stream, larger fish can make a bigger jump than a smaller fish. So it's probably not quite as simple as that. But when you have to make some decisions in the field over a bazillion culverts, that's the cutoff that we've used for a full barrier. And then we have another sort of range that we use for partial barrier versus no barrier at all. Yeah, so I can speak to that if that's of interest, but hopefully that helps give some idea anyway.
Thanks, Helen. So this next question, Elliot, you mentioned that you were doing interviews with elders and knowledge holders about important fish and water. And will these interviews be shared publicly somewhere? And I know you and Matt didn't have a lot of time at the end of the presentation to go through that. So thanks for asking that question, Laura.
Yes, we will share that that information.
I can paste in the chat here, Elliot, the link to the document that has been prepared with Elliot and the Resilience Institute, which does provide some of the information from those interviews. And there's also work that the Blackfoot Confederacy is doing with the Old Man Watershed Council and Cows and Fish on developing an online story map that would share some of that information, as well as some physical storyboards that they'd like to install at locations in the Bow and the Old Man Watershed. So it's preliminary, the work that's been done on that at this point, but it would be an opportunity to share some simple information that the nations feel comfortable with, and that's, I think, always the top priority is ensuring that any information that is shared is information that's appropriate, and that the ownership of that information is retained with the Blackfoot Nations. But definitely there are some steps that are being taken, and some information will be shared with community members in the nations, and some would be shared publicly. But I will share this link to a document summarizing some of the interviews that's on the Resilience Institute website.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you have anything else to add, Elliot?
Well, not really, but yeah. So just great to be involved in this conversation, and yeah, it's I think it's all productive, and it's going to be it's all going to be good.
Yes, I agree.
Absolutely. Do you have another question how responsive is the government towards recommendations and concerns from industrial development damage to sensitive environments? And specifically, does the federal government listen to the Blackfoot Confederacy?
I would say we have no one here from the federal government on the panel.
Yeah. Well, we do have Helen.
Yeah, I'm here
Oh,
from the
yeah.
federal
Sorry.
government, but I'm not sure that I'm at the right level to be speaking to that question. Certainly, we're in the very early stages of trying to establish a relationship with the Blackfoot Confederacy and the work specifically that I'm working on, but I can't speak to it more broadly than that. I think, you know, I'm hearing what Elliot is saying about the sort of regulatory response to things, and I do work for the federal government, and I have worked in a regulatory role. And I guess I would say that the only explanation I can offer from my perspective is the people that I've worked with have been very passionate and care a lot about the work they do. My guess would be if something has gone sideways, it's related to capacity. So staffing issues, and just not having enough staff to cover the area that's being covered. But that doesn't excuse it. So I think escalating it further is always a good option. So taking it higher up the chain in terms of, you know, looping in your MP, that kind of thing, or MLA, depending on the jurisdiction, are always helpful steps if you're not seeing a regulatory response that you're expecting.
Well, that's a very good bureaucratic response. But anyway, yeah, just being out here on the ground, you know, we're doing what we're doing. And it's very frustrating, you know. But, you know, we'll keep doing what we're doing and quantifying all the important things. We're doing great things, and we know the importance of this place. But I know what the hell we're doing, you know. And it's very important work. But that's all I'm going to say.
Thanks. Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Elliot. And I just want to highlight, folks, there's a number of great links that have been provided in the chat. And we haven't got to all of your questions, and we have tried to type some of the answers to questions. But there's lots of great resources in the chat. We have about a minute left, I think, in the time here. I just want to check in if there's another poll that we're meant to launch here before the end, before people sign off. If we could queue that up. So just check in on whether or not you learned something new today, and will this workshop impact the way you interact with native trout and their habitat? These are both just single choice, and reminder that to scroll down on the poll on your screen because the bottom question might be cut off. So give a few moments for folks to answer that. And yeah, I think, I don't know if the panelists have another minute or two to answer a few more questions. I know people are starting to sign off here, which I understand it's getting later. There was a question actually, maybe, oh, I've lost it. Sorry, folks. Oh, yeah, I think, oh, there's the impact, the results of the poll here. So it looks like most people learned something and will have an impact on their actions. Well, I think I think we'll wrap it up at that. I think we got to most of your questions that we could within the time here, and I appreciate and I just want to thank all of the presenters again for taking the time tonight to share their work with us and your knowledge and your passion. And thanks everyone for participating in the discussion and the questions. My cat's calling at me now. So appreciate everyone's participation. And if you've missed the earlier presentation, I think the link will be provided. And if you are interested in next week's presentation, be sure to sign up for that. It'll be all Tuesday evening next week, same time, same place.
Well,
So,
I just want to say something, Lesley.
sure.
Yeah, so thank you for allowing us this opportunity to speak to, native trout and our efforts, right? And, I'm really thankful that Trout Unlimited Canada is one of our partners, right? But what I would like to say is, we've been here for a long time, and we're still here, and we want to work with whatever agencies and whatever to sustain this important landscape, right? Yeah, we've got a beautiful place here, right? Yeah. And some of those trout are still there. And they're indicators of the health of these water systems. And so I'm really thankful that you all gave me and Matt the opportunity to tell you about some of our research. But we're monitoring these fish and these waters, right? And they're hanging in there, but they're disappearing. But thank you, Lesley. I really appreciate this. And we're working to keep monitoring this stuff, right? Hey, Matt, you got anything to say?
No, I think that's great, Elliot, that you're kind of closing it up for us. And I agree that the Blackfoot people have been guardians of the East Slopes for millennia, and it's very great to have the opportunity to work on the project with you and the Blackfoot Confederacy, and I look forward to the work continuing.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Elliot. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Lesley, thank you. You're pretty awesome.
You too. Thanks.